This is Duke University.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Grantham. I'm with the Office of Communication Services, and I'm glad you could join us today. About 3 years ago, we started this event called Primetime as a way to provide more opportunities for faculty and staff to come out and hear directly from our senior administrators and to engage with them. This is our 11th event, and I'm glad to see such a healthy turnout. We have a number of people watching online as well. I know we have folks in Smith Warehouse with facilities management, people in OIT over in American Tobacco campus, and our friends down at the Marine Lab, and countless others. I think last count we had at least 50 computers connected, either individuals or in conference rooms. So welcome all. Let me make a few quick announcements before we get us started. You should have picked up one of these on your way in. This is our feedback card. There's also a link, if you're watching this online, same information, same questions. These are really important for us. We take your feedback, we go back, compile it. Your feedback helps to shape these events, and it helps provide topics for us for the future. So please take a moment and fill that out and drop it off. There are boxes on your way out. You can also drop it in campus mail. So how many of you, by show of hands, have been to Primetime before? Pretty good number. Excellent. So for those of you who have not, basically this breaks out into two components. The first piece is our guest will talk on the topic at hand, and then the second half we devote to audience question and answers. Now, when we get to that part, it's probably a good time for me to introduce a couple people. Leonore Manai is over in this aisle. She has a microphone, and Jeffrey Mock over in this aisle, the editor for Duke Today, and Leonore is the editor for Working at Duke, the fine publication that you get each month. They have a microphone, and if you have a question, please raise your hand. They will try and get a microphone to you so that you can ask your question, and so everyone, including the folks who are watching online, can hear it. So today our topic is the economy. The impact here at Duke, the implications for our future, and the steps that are being considered as we face these challenges. I don't know if you saw the newspapers last week, but the new numbers for unemployment in North Carolina came out for March. That figure is now approaching 11%, which is about 500,000 people without jobs here in North Carolina. And while most indicators like that are increasing and many of the market forces are declining, one area the economy has really spurred growth in is in questions. We have a lot of questions, and we're all asking them ourselves around the water cooler and staff meetings and even around the dining room table. So today we want to address some of those questions where we can, and we're very fortunate to have 4 of our senior administrators here to help, who've been on the forefront of many of these issues, to spend some time with us to help us better understand the issues and how Duke is responding. So please welcome Provost Peter Lange, Executive Vice President Tallman Trask, Vice President for Finance Hoff Milam, and Vice President for Human Resources Kyle Cavanaugh. So Hoff, let's start with you. If we could maybe start with the financials. And we keep hearing about this number, $125 million, as our budget shortfall. And to some, that may be a difficult number to grasp. Can you help explain kind of what that number means in terms of operational realities at Duke?
Well, Paul, I think it's a difficult question or a difficult number for all of us to grasp. It's a daunting number. I think to get it... I'm surrounded by 2 mics. Can you hear me now? Okay, well, let me speak a little louder. Okay.
Quiet Southern boy.
So the 125 million, to understand 125 million, it's probably best to speak of it in context of our operating budget. I think we have an excellent website that our communication staff has put together. I imagine some of you have looked on the website and know that the Duke budget total Duke University budget is $2 billion. So if you look at the $125 million, we're talking about 6% of the total budget of Duke. But this does understate really the magnitude of the challenge we have in front of us. If you look at the total Duke budget, about $800 million of the budget is for sponsored funds and financial aid. And there's really not any cost cutting or significant revenue enhancement that we can do that will have a huge impact on the bottom line and addressing the $125 million gap that we're dealing with. In case you don't understand sponsored funds, when we spend $1 in sponsored funds, say on a grant, for example, we're reimbursed $1. Actually, we're reimbursed a little more than that to cover some overhead. So actually, we lose in the long run if we cut expenses in sponsored funds. So we're left with an operating budget of $1.2 billion that we can actually deal with in terms of either cost cutting or it could be revenue enhancement. Now, of that 1.2, so we're talking about 10% of the budget that we can work with. And of the 1.2 billion, over 60% of that is for salaries and fringe benefits. So you can see that we've got quite a challenge ahead of us. But before I stop talking, let me point out to you that I think there is some good news here, is significant, and that is that the trustees of the university have given us time to work through this over a 3-year period, so we don't have to take any action without having ample time to give it careful consideration. And you're going to hear more about the steps that we plan to take from the other panelists this morning.
Thanks, Hoff. And so, Kyle, one of the things that Hoff mentioned in terms of the compensation expenses, and President Broadhead has said in February that we can expect a smaller Duke. Can you help us understand, like, one number that was mentioned was 1,000 positions. Is that something that we can expect in terms of a smaller Duke, and how do we become a smaller Duke?
Thanks, Paul. Can you all hear me? Okay, great, thanks. I think Hoff did a terrific job of kind of setting a framework in terms of the number. So to just kind of recalibrate that, $2 billion operation, 1.2 that we have access to, 125 million upside down kind of going into next year, but we've got a period of time here that is different than a lot of our peer institutions, and that has been a true significant advantage strategically for the institution. So what we've put together in working with the trustees and senior leadership and many people across the campus is a fairly comprehensive, integrated workforce strategic plan that has already deployed a number of strategies, some things that we're going to do here immediately, and some things that are still kind of on the table. So let me talk briefly about a couple of those. So the first thing that was launched back in February when we had our arms around the potential severity of this was to actually make sure that the number didn't grow any further. So what we were able to do there was actually freeze compensation at $50K and above. So all of those that are earning $50K at that number and below would receive a one-time lump sum payment of $1,000 effective July 1. Now, that helps us in terms of ensuring that the problem doesn't grow, but it doesn't help us attacking that problem. So what we then secondarily launched was what we labeled as a vacancy management initiative. And if you're a student of higher education, you're watching what's going on around the country, you'll see that a number of our peers have actually now adapted some of the same approaches that we have incorporated. This is not a true hiring freeze, but what this is trying to ask people to be much more prudent in terms of external hiring and putting a higher level of review in terms of the posting and ultimately the hiring of different positions. Now, we're a complicated operation. Hoff had mentioned about issues around sponsored research. It doesn't help that 125 number at all if we freeze hiring off of a grant that we receive from NIH. So those dollars have continued to flow, those hirings have continued to flow. But what we have asked is for that review process to be now approved by the provost or executive vice president or their designee. In most cases, that has been delegated down to the dean's level, but we are bringing a higher level of scrutiny in terms of any of our external hiring. We try to measure a whole lot of activity in the human resource world, and one of the things we've seen since we've announced that is a steady decrease, obviously, in the amount of external postings, But we've also noticed, to Paul's point of the 11% unemployment, a steady, significant increase in the number of external applicants that we're receiving. So that's been kind of a challenge to manage. The third piece that has been launched, and I'm sure some of the other panelists will want to talk a little bit more about this, is an effort that we refer to as DART, or Department Administrative Restructuring Team. That effort is looking at cost reduction opportunities across the entire enterprise. Right now, it is at an assessment phase of trying to take a look at all of our administrative areas, and in a highly decentralized environment, those things that we could potentially continue on a decentralization process, those things that we may have to consider centralizing, those things that we may have to consider eliminating. But there have been some things that have dropped out of that process early on that we're labeling as low-hanging fruit. For example, the overwhelming majority of faculty and staff that we have employed here are currently on direct deposit. However, we still go through the process of printing paper pay stubs for everybody that works here. Most organizations have gotten out of that years ago, so we'll be moving forward with eliminating that. The cost savings of that actually equates to between 1 and 2 FTEs. So the DART work will continue, and that's where we really are hoping that we generate some significant saving opportunities. The fourth thing that we are going to launch, there will be more information coming out this week about this, is the first of a staff retirement initiative. Let me talk a little bit about our retirement plans in general. If you're aware, we have two different types of retirement plans. We have a defined benefit plan, which essentially is a pension plan, and then we have a defined contribution plan. The defined benefit plan works off a formula. Once a person is vested, the actual pension is based on a combination of factors, including years of service, the average of their top 5 continuous salaries, and a multiplier. What we're able to do is actually modify some of those parameters to do two different things: make more people eligible for retiree health insurance immediately, and also increase the worth of the individual's pension. So the group that we are working with right now, and we've worked across campus to identify it, is a combination of criteria. One thing that we're looking at are all staff that meet the age of 50 and also have at least 10 years of service, credible service with the institution. That's a fairly sizable number. It is between 600 and 700 individuals. What we'll be doing is rolling out an opportunity in early May for those individuals to consider. It is a completely voluntary operation for them. We do have to kind of be conscious of some significant time frames there. So there's a 45-day, for example, consideration period that we'll be looking at. During that time, we're also going to be evaluating the potential of an exempt staff incentive plan as well. And so we'll take the next 60 days to evaluate that. So the combination of the freezing of salaries above 50, the work on the vacancy management piece, the work of the DART piece, the combination of retirement incentives, our hope is that by systematically working through this over the next couple of months, we could significantly mitigate or potentially even eliminate the need for any reduction in force. But we won't know that without any absolute clarity until probably later in the summer going into the fall.
Thanks, Kyle. Tallman, the next one's for you. If you could describe what financial measures have been taken so far to help address this issue, as well as help us understand what we can expect next year if the economy starts to improve.
Well, Hoff and Kyle have mentioned many of the things we've done. We are constricting hiring. We will be having some incentive plans. We have essentially eliminated the capital budget. DART is working through a number of policy changes which are meant to get money out of the budget. I think the most important thing to say here is that we're trying to do this carefully and deliberately. Unlike a number of other universities who have announced that the sky is falling and they must take immediate action, we asked the trustees to let us do this over a period of 2 to 3 years, and actually to invest some university resources in taking that time. In large part, that's because Duke, I think, values its employees, perhaps more than some others, and we're trying to do the best we can to protect those employees. The first and probably most dramatic financial measure the trustees approved was us borrowing $500 million of taxable debt that we can use for liquidity as we go through this exercise over the next 18 months. The only thing I would say about next year, because this is all dealing with uncertainty, is I don't think next year will be better. If I had to guess, it may be a little worse. Because of the way our money flows, we have not seen the full impact of some of the reductions yet, which is why we're trying to make as many adjustments as we can before that. So unless there is a massive improvement in the economy, 2010 is not going to be a whole lot better.
So I guess that leads me, Peter, to the next question around the capital budget has basically disappeared. What does that mean for things like new campus or other academic endeavors?
Well, let me start out by saying that the three people who preceded me have talked about the way we are saving or trying to save on our expenses in order to do what? In order to be able to continue the improvement of the university and improve its academic mission. And everybody understands that ultimately that is our core priority. And that means we've identified three pieces of pursuing that academic mission that we think are most critical. Faculty excellence, the quality of the undergraduate experience, and the quality of the graduate and professional education. So those are our three top priorities that we're moving toward. Now, there's no question that we need to slow the pace of some of the things that we're doing and have been doing for 10 years. It's worth remembering we've been growing and improving at a tremendous rate over the last 10 years. So it's on top of that we're now slowing that pace somewhat. We're slowing the number of searches for new faculty. In some schools, the faculty will not grow at all. In some schools, it will shrink a little bit. In some schools, it may continue to grow a little bit, but slower than in the recent past. We're also slowing the pace of the creation of new academic programs. Things like, you probably won't see a new program like Duke Engage in the next 2 or 3 years, the way we had a number of programs over the last decade. The third thing, and Tallman sort of said, well, we're not going to have a capital budget. Well, what does that mean? That means basically we've put a moratorium on all new construction for at least the next 2 years. And that includes new campus, which people have heard a lot about. And it means more generally that we're going to be very careful before we go making 30-year commitments for debt service, for instance, to pay for new buildings. But as soon as we can, we are going to carefully begin to bring in new construction projects because they enable the program that enables us to reach the mission. Now, one thing, many of you may work in different parts of the university. It's worthwhile remembering that every school in the university faces these challenges in a somewhat different way. Arts and sciences doesn't have exactly the same challenges that law has or that divinity or medicine have. And so each one is going to approach this somewhat differently. So if you're sitting in your unit, you may hear something that's a little different. They're all going to be doing this slowing down. They're all going to be being very careful about where they put their resources. But they may do it in different ways across units. So if you're sitting in your units, it will look different. Now, in order to maintain our momentum and to privilege these priorities, we are going to have to make some reductions elsewhere. Obviously, freezing construction for a couple of years is one such. What are some of the others? Well, administrative costs, from paper clips to publications, from repainting offices to replacing computers. All of those things have been slowed down. We've slowed all of those down already. Entertainment. We've discovered that we're doing more entertainment. I mean, they're usually for good purposes, like when we're trying to hire faculty, but you can do that in different ways. We're going to trim that back. We're going to not focus as much, we're not going to focus resources on less critical programs. We're going to be less supportive. We're going to put less resources into some of the support services which don't seem as crucial in this period. And we're going to have to continue to watch compensation and the growth of compensation. We put all those together. We believe we can sustain the momentum that Duke has had. And that is, after all, what we're hoping to do with all of the steps that we're taking.
I guess one follow-up to that, is that the steps that Duke is taking, are they similar to what other institutions are doing?
I think actually that right now we are trying, we're able to take a little more advantage, because, you know, in a down situation, there are faculty that are available that you wouldn't have available necessarily. You'd lose to some competitors that you really like. So we're able to take a little bit of advantage of that, and we're hoping to be able to do that in the years coming up, but that requires us to make cuts in other areas.
Great. So before we open up the Q&A session, I do want to include a few questions that we received in advance. We had a lot of questions actually come in. This topic is of interest to many of you, and so we had a number of questions that were submitted. So let me start, Kyle, with you if I can. One of the questions that was submitted was, I have heard a rumor that there may be retirement buyouts for employees with long service records. Is this true? And I think you've basically kind of answered this one already.
I think it's important that we're all kind of working off of the same framework, and so let me try to draw this thread again. The number that we're shooting at, 125 over a period of 3 years, what are some of the things that we can do? One of the strategies is actually voluntarily reducing the size of the workforce through retirement incentives. And so we are going to do at least one, and a second is under consideration for the different types of retirement plans that we have. The specific details of the first plan will roll out the latter part of this week, and then individuals that are offered the opportunity would receive communication in early May. The hope is that if we're offering this somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 people, that we have a fairly good take rate. And this is how all of these things start to get connected. So we now also have DART operating, and we have the Vacancy Management Initiative, and so the decision to whether or not to backfill those positions has to be taken very, very seriously, and the notion of reducing those through a voluntary basis becomes critical. So short answer is that the answer is yes. We are going to do a retirement incentive plan. It will roll out here early part of May. It will be available to approximately 600 to 700 individuals.
Thanks. And Peter, if I can come back to you, one of the questions that were submitted about the increasing number of students and the decreasing number of Duke employees and becoming a smaller Duke. And what is the changed vision for our level of service and instruction to our students?
Okay, so let me say 3 things about that. First of all, the number of students in currently existing programs is not going to increase very much. So I don't think the level of service will change very much, especially since we're not expecting to draw the bulk of employees as we have to reduce positions from the most direct support for academic programs. Now, there will be new academic programs emerging in some of the schools. We've already created a new degree called Masters in Management Studies, for instance, in the Fuqua School. But those programs are desired to enhance revenue, and to the extent they do it, a portion of that revenue will have to be used to pay for the additional employees necessary to make that program excellent and successful. So if you take those 3 things together, not too much from the academic programs, not too much growth in our current programs, and new programs that have to pay for the support service they need, I think actually we don't expect to see any kind of significant change in the workload that our employees face from our academic programs.
Great. Hoff, a question here around finances. So for those units dependent on endowment monies, what drop in the percentage of return are you forecasting for each of the next 2 years? And it may help to explain how the endowment works with the 3-year rolling average.
Well, I'd love to have the answer to that question. Endowment and investment income make up about 20% of our total budget currently. And there's just we're not trying to predict what the returns are going to be over the next 2 or 3 years. We do have some scenarios that we're working with, and the scenario that we used to develop the $125 million shortfall or gap, we seem to be right on line with. I don't know whether that's good news or bad news. The good news is it hasn't gotten worse than that. The way our endowment spending policy works, the spending rate each year is based on an average of the 3 previous calendar year-end market values. All that means is that in a rising market, the endowment spending rate is somewhat dampened. It doesn't go up as fast as the overall endowment goes up. That's a good thing. The idea is that it saves money for when you really need it, like now. So now we're in this decline in the market. So we're going to see this 3-year average trend down over the next 2, maybe 3 years. And during that time, it gives us, because it's a dampened decline, it gives us more time to adjust. Again, another benefit of our endowment spending policy. While I can't predict what the returns are going to be, I can give you maybe some level of comfort by putting some parameters around it. Currently, it looks like the endowment will be down 25 to 30% for this fiscal year we're in now. If that is the bottom of the market, or the bottom of the decline for our endowment, then, and let's say it were to remain there for the next couple of years, with this trailing 3-year average, we don't see the drop in the endowment spending rate dropping by more than 20%. Okay? Now, obviously, if it stays flat for a long time, ultimately it'll dip down in a 25 to 30% decline, but I think we'll see the market bounce back up before then. So the decline in the spending rate should never go or decline by as much as the market value of the endowment.
Thanks, Alf. And then finally, Tallman, one of the questions that came in was around time frame. And so you've mentioned the DART, or the Administrative Reform Group. The question was, when will you announce the detailed steps to be taken in order to achieve the budget reduction? And is workforce reduction one possibility?
Well, we've been working on it now for a number of months and have had meetings with the trustees and the trustee executive committee. We're beginning to roll these things out. Obviously, one important target is the trustees have to approve the budget for next year in May. And so that'll include a number of the steps. Some will be done over the summer. My expectation is that they will almost all be in place, at least as well we can judge the size of the problem, by the fall. As much as I wish I could say workforce reduction is not a possibility, we're not ready to say that yet. I think we can say it will be one of the very last possibilities, and we are optimistic we can get through this without having to resort to it.
Now, if others have questions, if you would, just raise your hand, and Leonora or Jeffrey will try and get a microphone to you.
How has the health system been affected by all this?
Tallman?
The health system has a different financial underpinning entirely. It's driven largely by its operating revenues and its operating margins, which this year are positive. Its investments have been hit, as all university investments have, but it's a smaller part of their operating budget, so they're not feeling quite the pressure the university is, although looking forward, they're trying to also be quite conservative. But many of these measures that we're going to announce do not apply to the health system.
So you spoke briefly about using this time as an opportunity to better faculty in some cases, because there are going to be financial incentives that you may be able to offer that other places can't. And I guess this isn't directed just to you, Provost Lange, but in general, during economic downturns, we see lots of companies, at least, who will put out more resources and be less conservative in doing so, and some have shown to make great strides in doing that once the economy went in an upswing. Has there been much discussion of that and philosophy around that, and do you maybe look at those opportunities as well?
Well, I think actually that's what we're doing. If you think about the $160 million that the board set aside what is the real effect of that? The real effect of that is that the schools have not had to face a set of sudden or cliff-like costs that they otherwise would have had to face in the coming year. That gives them more room to continue to be a little more aggressive in hiring and in student recruitment and so forth. So we are trying to do that within the pretty constrained environment that we're in, because we are facing a longer-term situation, and as contrasted to a for-profit corporation, we can't invest now and expect to make the profits later, at least not in cash. We will profit as an institution from hiring better faculty and from being as aggressive as we can, and I think that's what we're actually doing, and what I tried to suggest, we're trying to work with the deans. The critical need there is to create the space to do that by watching our other financial costs very, very carefully.
Paul, if I may, to just tag on to that, this sounds somewhat inconsistent, but we're also very aggressively going after external funding now that's coming through the stimulus package. So we're louder? Okay now? There we go. They turned me down on purpose, I think. So this sounds somewhat inconsistent, but we are also very aggressively in another line of our business going after a lot of funding that is available through the stimulus package. And so if you kind of navigate yourself through the HR website, you'll find some stimulus positions there that actually are research intensive. Now, those funding dollars are only for a duration of 18 to 24 months. But it's an example, I think, to exactly to your point of at an opportunity where there is a downturn, we're still being very aggressive in going after opportunities.
I mean, the decision we made to do this over a period of time, to put upwards of $150 million of university resources into it, and to take on $500 million worth of debt was for exactly that reason. We don't want to be caught in panic mode. What's made Duke great over the years is not that it had all the money that others have, but it's been somewhat more aggressive and entrepreneurial, and we don't want to lose that in this time. It'll obviously have to scale back, but it needs to remain a part of our thought for the next 3 to 5 years, regardless of the economics.
Excuse me, could you please share how the university leadership is going to help employees and managers remain motivated to help grow and help Duke succeed, even in the face of some challenges and some ways that we can't typically reward employees? I think I'm really concerned about retaining really good staff talent in addition to faculty talent.
Yeah, I think I would at least kind of venture a start on a response to that. I think one of the critical things that we're learning about ourselves internally and talking to institutions and companies kind of across the country is an issue of communication. And so that's, I think, the intent of this forum this afternoon and some ongoing communication to be speaking as clearly as possible about what situation are we in, what steps are we taking to mitigate that impact, and what does the future look like? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is we've been really challenged in looking at, for example, a lot of the celebratory or cultural events that we have at the institution to see how can we curtail those, not eliminate those, but keep those that are really respectful of the culture of Duke, but also reflective of the economic situation that we're in. So those are two immediate actions that we are taking.
Let me say something in addition. I don't want this to sound sappy, but I think one of the things that makes people like to work for Duke is the sense of the ongoing improvement of the university. And so it ties back to this question as well. To the extent that we can keep our forward momentum, to the extent that we can get people to understand in each of the units that the deans and the faculty and the staff are working together to continue to improve that school or that unit in the face of this downturn, I think that's part of the way we maintain morale as well. And one of the most critical things that we're doing right now is we've keyed up a strategic planning, a kind of a mini strategic planning exercise in each of the schools and in each of the other major academic units. We basically said, okay, we're in the middle of a strategic plan. We're facing some different external environment. Let's look at what we're doing. Let's see at the lessons we've learned over the last 2 years. What can we do really well? How can we maximize our ability to continue to move forward when things aren't as good? And we want to enlist as many folks as we can in that discussion unit by unit. And I think that's an important part of sustaining morale and keeping people believing in Duke and what they're doing here going forward.
That's a good point, maybe a good opportunity to remind people that one way to participate in the process is through contributing your ideas and thoughts through a website that's being created for that purpose, which is Enduring the Troubled Economy, and you can find that at www.duke.edu/economy. If you could stand up just so we can know where the question's coming from. Sometimes it's hard.
Thank you for your leadership on these troubling issues, because I've been keeping a sense of what's going on at other universities, and it is indeed very dire at our peer institutions, more so than it appears to be here. I have two questions. One, what has been the quality and quantity of the cost-saving suggestions that you've gotten so far? Can you give us any sense of that, the cost-saving suggestions from employees? And number two, how long do you think the pay freeze or is going to go on? Is that going to go on indefinitely? Anyway.
Let me take a first stab. And I don't want to try to sugarcoat this. Everyone should understand we're in a very difficult situation. I mean, fortunately, our endowment is down a little bit less than others, and we are a little bit less dependent on it than are others. For example, Harvard's Arts and Sciences is 40% endowment driven, which is why their problem is so large, but we're still facing a $100 million plus shortfall. In terms of the savings we've looked at so far, I think we're about halfway there. Some of those have not been implemented. They will be over time. A lot of them will depend on little actions, not big ones, done by individuals over time. You know, we're clearly mindful of the compensation issue. Didn't like doing what we did this year, but thought we had no alternative. It'll certainly be a discussion of active interest over the next year, and the initial plans are try to make room for a salary adjustment in the FY 10-11 budget. Whether we can actually do that or not will depend on a lot of things between now and then. And we've gotten a significant number of employee suggestions. To date, very few that we haven't thought about, and very few that actually generate any money, but keep them coming. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation in lots of spaces about it was too hot in my office on that snowy day, and if the university would just turn down the heat, everything would go away. To put it into perspective, if the university shut down the heating plant and shut down the chilled water plant and just told everyone, including hospital patients, it is what it is, deal with it, that would solve about 25% of the problem.
Of these 600, 700 people that will be asked for early retirement, I'm assuming those are exempt and non-exempt positions. They probably also have felt the impact of the economy, possibly with their retirement funds, 401ks or 403bs or whatever, being depleted. So what type of incentive are you going to give them to really want them to retire? Now, I, of course, have reached the age, but I haven't reached the number of years of service. So if I understood you correctly, you said the person will have reached the age of 50 with 10 years of service. So can you share what those incentives will be to make that attractive for someone that may have lost 28, 30, 40% of their funds?
You would have to keep going on your escalation if you were looking at my personal portfolio in terms of what's happened. But remember that I described that we have essentially two types of retirement plans here. We have a true pension plan, a defined benefit plan, and then we have a defined contribution plan. There's clearly a disproportionate impact on those depending on how they had their assets allocated in the defined contribution plan. And that's the plan that we are still under discussion about whether or not we will do anything there. But we'll make a decision on that piece here in the next 60 days. The part that is rolling out are for those individuals that are in the pension plan, because that has not been as dramatically impacted. So there are two primary criteria and decision points here. One is typically around health care, and of that number, we'll have well over 97% of that number that by putting an incentive of adding a number of years of age and a number of years of service, that will actually be immediately eligible for retiree health insurance. That's the first part. The second part is by adding the number to the years of service, it will increase the value of their monthly pension. So those become the two kind of pressure points in terms of making a decision. These become very individualized decisions for people, obviously, based on their individual circumstance and their family circumstance. It's virtually impossible to predict. I wish I could give you what our projected take rate would be. Our hope is to be as clear as possible in terms of communicating with people. When folks receive individual packets, they will receive information that will show a diagram that if they were to retire today, what the value of that pension would be versus if they take the incentive, what that will be. So we're positioning folks to be as informed as possible. We will also roll out group educational sessions, and people will have an opportunity to meet individually with a benefit representative as well. You're welcome.
Volunteer plans include bargaining unit employees that meets the age and the year requirement.
I'm not sure I
I'm
understand.
sorry, could you repeat the question?
Does those volunteers, you know, the ones that you say can volunteer with the age and the years, that include bargaining unit employees?
Correct, absolutely.
I should go back to your question. We have been struggling trying to see whether an incentive package for exempt monthly employees makes sense. And to date, anyway, we have not been able to figure out one that we could afford that would actually incent anyone. So we're going to keep working on it over the summer, but right now we don't have one.
Hi. I hate to raise this issue, but I'm sure that it's been talked about already behind closed doors. Duke's contribution for its exempt employees who participate in the defined contribution plan is very generous. Are there discussions about reducing Duke's contribution?
Well, there have been discussions. Our hope is to protect all of our employee benefits as much as possible. And so we have no plans to reduce any of them next year. We'll have to see how a lot of these things play out and so forth. But, you know, what makes it, among many things that make it worthwhile to work at Duke is that benefit package. And we're really not anxious to cut it if we can possibly avoid it. You know, in the long run, if other things don't work, that will have to be on the table, but it's not right now. Besides, the faster we give you money, the faster the market loses it, so it doesn't really matter.
Any other questions out there?
All right, but only this is the last one. So, when in talking about the capital budget and putting a halt on that, and so stopping new campus construction, can you talk about how reductions reductions in what Duke is putting money towards may be affecting the local and regional, et cetera, economies?
$100 million. It's been running about that for a while. I mean, one of the reasons we're in a good place is we actually decided to make a lot of capital investments about 8-9 years ago, and they're just sort of done right now. We don't have any big projects in the ground that aren't finished. We don't have any big projects except new campus that were in the immediate future and so forth. But the effect is that we'll be taking $250 million out of the construction industry in Piedmont, North Carolina. And that will reverberate through lots of families. It's just undeniable.
Could you please speak to Duke's commitment to place laid-off employees? And will you provide university-wide statistics regarding the number of employees laid off and how quickly they are placed?
I'll take a shot at least the beginning of that. I thought I heard 3 different questions kind of woven in there, so if I missed something, please kind of stand up and repeat it. As you know, that the strategies we've laid out here are actually, I think, a commitment to exactly that, to try to mitigate before we get to that point. The reality over the last couple of years, if you look, Duke has not been immune to layoffs, but they have tended to be very small and very isolated. And so what we're working through is a strategy that would help position us that if we do end up in that place, that there are going to be relatively small numbers. If that were to happen, we have a couple of different things that kick in, depending on where the position is housed and what type of position, whether it's covered under one of our 3 collective bargaining agreements, we would have that issue to follow, or we have a university policy that governs exactly what the process is, the review, approval, tenets associated with that, and then the impact to the individual. The commitment is that the individual would be assigned a transition coordinator. That person is given the responsibility to help shepherd that, and first and foremost is helping to look for other opportunities within the Duke enterprise. So that would be the first thing. Individuals are given a fairly significant notice of at least 60 days, and then depending on the duration of time that the individual is here, they're also extending their employment through severance coverage as well. So all of those things kind of factor into a fairly rich type of reduction in force program.
Which we hope we never get to.
Any final questions? All right, I thought we'd wrap up. I know we've covered a lot of ground, but I wanted to wrap up by asking each of the panelists if they have some final thoughts or closing comments they'd like to make. Peter, I'll start with you.
Well, I just think that we've answered the questions and we sort of tried to position ourselves. I think the most important thing to take beyond this is that we recognize that one of the biggest assets we have in going forward are our employees and the need to be transparent, or as transparent as possible, about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the trade-offs are as we're doing it. Because I think if people understand that, it makes it much easier to get everybody to understand how the university is moving forward and to be as supportive as they can be. And so I know, and all of us are out a lot talking with people and trying to increase that understanding and transparency, and this is obviously one way of doing that.
And I think to continue it, we'll probably have these periodically. I mean, this is a very complicated set of issues, lots of moving targets, and we want to make sure people understand exactly where we are and where things are headed. But obviously, until we know things like what's the market going to do, which we probably will never know as we used to know it, who's interested in retiring, if anyone. I mean, until those things get played out, we can't really size this question in a permanent sense.
Well, I began by saying that it's fortunate that we have the support of the trustees to give us time to plan through this carefully because it is such a big challenge. I think I should also say, though, that it's important for us, and I'm speaking to those of us in front of the room as well, not to get complacent and be comfortable that we have that period of time to plan carefully and find ourselves not having the answers later on. I think for us to have the answers, we're going to depend on we're going to depend on everyone. And I encourage you not only to submit your good ideas to the website, but also to your supervisor or others in your office. I know that I've gotten a number of good ideas from my staff about cuts we can make in our budget, and I've found often that the best ideas come from the people that are closest to the action, so please help us.
Paul, first I'd like to thank you for facilitating and bringing this together. I think communication during periods of time like this is absolutely essential, and we're committed to that. I think the other is that we're all in this together, so to just reinforce what Hoff had just concluded with, to please keep those ideas coming. We have a comprehensive plan on how we're approaching this, but there's another 2 or 3 chapters to unfold depending on what some of the other economic conditions play out to be like.
Thank you, and thank you all. Let's give them a round of applause for being here today.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.